the activity could even be like painting, for example. The activity can be very literary. If you have a group that's very educated, you can talk about writing a little passage, using a metaphor and writing about a little passage about the childhood friends, okay? So you can be quite creative. Okay, I like this structure because I think it guides me when I'm doing therapy, so I knew, how I could get my clients, how I could get these people with dementia to be in that frame of mind and to be transported back to feel comfortable enough to share. I'm not very good at this.
Just put down, long down.
Okay. I think the guideline is as a facilitator, okay? It is important that you listen attentively, you not rush the person with dementia. They do take a bit of time to respond, perhaps to trigger questions. I always say the rule of thumb is at least 5 seconds. So when you ask a question to trigger their memory, if they don't respond, wait, 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 before you start asking your second question. Give them time to let the question sink in, to think about it, and to share whatever they're comfortable with sharing. Ask questions without testing. Okay? What? You mean this is an iron? No, this is not an iron. Don't get into a debate with them as to what this is or what this is not. That is not the purpose of reminiscent therapy. Okay? Accept what they said as true memories. It's their reality. They may start sharing and say, oh, I used to be a pilot. I used to fly for Cathay Pacific. You think, yeah, right, Cathay Pacific doesn't even exist at that time. That's not important. It's not the literal meaning that they're saying or sharing. Okay? We want to focus on the feeling content, and validate them and reflect them. Okay? So be extremely forgiving, or be mindful that their reality is not our reality. And it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. It's the process when they share and how it makes them feel. Okay? It is important, especially when we are working with our current cohort of older adults who maybe have gone through World War II, and when they're sharing certain memories, if they choose to share those memories, it can be extremely painful, and we must be mindful of it. Okay, so when we deal with it, we must make sure that we are checking on how they feel, and if there were any feelings that were elicited that needs to be looked into, we need to follow up on that. Okay, so you don't do this activity and then forget about that when people could be experiencing the trauma that they did go through, and they need to take time to process that and before they can move on, and it's especially important to be sensitive when dealing with it. Why do we do it? Many benefits. Okay, the purpose of it gives them a sense of value. When they are sharing, they felt that they had something to contribute, okay, something to share about. They felt once more that they are actually important. They used to have certain roles, which they probably don't have now, but they were able to think about the roles they used to have. They were able to share it, okay? They're gonna feel a sense of power, a sense of importance, a sense of value, that they were contributing members of society. They were not what they are today. They tend as well as a group, if we have a group dynamics, they feel that they belong to this group, they can contribute to the cohort ideas of what went through, what they go through previously. And it's very nice to feel to be part of that group. It also recognizes them as an individual with their individual experiences. Everybody has a story to tell, okay? It also gives them the power, though, that they get to choose what they choose to share. You can't force them to share things they don't want to share. So it's very nice when they feel that I have control, I choose to share what I want to share. It can be very fun, okay? Go try this at home among your friends. You don't have to necessarily try it with older adults first. Try it, and it is actually very, very fun. Okay, and as I was saying, the activity can involve all your senses, not necessarily your sight, sometimes your hearing, your scent of touch, your smell. So it is an activity when all your senses can be engaged, and it is actually very, very enjoyable. You find a lot of joy thinking about the things that you used to do, thinking about experiences you used to have. It's a very, very enjoyable thing. And it gives us the opportunity to validate, to reflect the emotions and the feelings. Okay? It gives us the opportunity to support these older adults as well in reflecting and validating how they feel. gives the carer an opportunity to better understand their client. Okay, because very often professional carers will have clients turn up, when they are in a stage of when they have been diagnosed with dementia, and they may not be able to collect enough life history to understand what the person was like before dementia. So this is an exercise that's quite nice because it gives you more insight about your client and what he or she was like before they had dementia. What was their personality like? What was their like? What was their dislikes? Now, like I said, the structure and the protocol that I've adopted was from this huge study that was conducted in Europe. And these are some of the comments that we get from people who participated in these groups. I really enjoy watching my mother speak with other people. She will respond, she will cooperate and take part in such a lively way, and she doesn't need to fight them. Because it's all a whole collection of books and it was a whole collections of stories. And in this case, it was a diet. So they had this reminiscent therapy group done with the daughter and the mother. So the daughter was able to see the mother in a slightly new light, since after her diagnosis. And to see that, the mother actually had so much to share and was really, really enjoying the experience. The second comment was from a spouse. Sharing memories with my wife as a result of the project has been the first time we have talked at the same level for many years. I think that speaks a lot. When they found a connection, they found that they could communicate, okay? They could communicate again. Okay, now if you indulge me, how much time do I have? I just talk very quickly about my research. So I'm interested in looking at life reviews or life story in terms of its impact on challenging behavior in people with dementia. So studies have shown that personalized psychosocial intervention, as in one-to-one intervention, has a good impact or gives positive behavioral functioning. So I've chosen to do structured life review as a tool and looking at the impact it had on challenging behaviors. Why did I do that? Because I think through life review, it promotes person-centered care, okay? It allows the care staff to value the person's contribution, okay? Remember my V. It allows the care staff to recognize the person as an individual because they'll all be sharing their life story. And it allows the carers to see the world from the perspective of their client, okay? And it allows as well clues to be gathered, okay, as to the unmet needs, which Paul will talk on a little bit more, that was communicated through the challenging behavior, okay? So if we can understand why they behave the way they behave, and what are the needs that were not met, we can therefore try to meet those needs so that we can create a positive social environment. So what's structured life review? It's actually an exploration of the person's developmental lifespan. So I would get them to talk about their life across the different stages, and it allows the carer to recognize the person as a unique individual, not just the person, or rather not just the disability, the dementia, but rather the person as a unique individual with their own story to tell. Okay, it also allows the reflection on past life events and perhaps provides insight to why he or she is behaving the way they did. It allows the understanding of the challenging behavior, given the context that it was taking place. It allows the care staff to see the person behind the patient. Very often, because of the nursing needs or the caring needs, sometimes we may forget to see the person behind the fact that he is a patient. It allows the understanding of unmet needs, okay? With more information about the person, with more information about his or her life history, it tells us about his likes, his dislikes, and his personality, and therefore allows us to understand the meaning behind the behavior. And maybe if you understand why they behave the way they behave, you would think that actually it's not that troublesome or it's not that challenging after all. It has never been done before, that's why I'm doing it. It's never been done ever before. And I think that if we have evidence and good empirical evidence to show that it works, it is something that can be routinely incorporated into care plan, okay? hypothesizing is that live review will reduce the frequency of challenging behavior because it enhances the personhood in person with dementia. And basically the aim is to evaluate the impact of live reviews on challenging behavior in people with dementia. So what I'll do is I use a live review protocol. I will see the clients for 8 weeks. Every week I'll see them an hour, and I'll get them to talk about the childhood, and perhaps if they're interested to talk about their adulthood, and bring them through the developmental lifespan. I mean, but if they choose to talk about their cat that they feel very strongly for, that's what they choose to talk about, okay? I would have loved to have the family carer join in every single session, but if it's not possible, it is compulsory, at least in my consent form, that they will have to attend at least the last session, because I think that validates the client, that validates the person with dementia. He's telling this story so that his stories can be shared, okay? And eventually they do have a little final product. It's probably going to be a board or a book which they can bring with them wherever they go if they need step-up care, you know, for them to share their life story when it becomes increasingly hard to verbalize. Through pictures, through caption, hopefully they can get to share their life story with their care staff. So this study is a collaboration between JCU and CGH, and we are very thankful for our community partners and the Elder Care who has kindly allowed us to go in and speak to their clients with dementia, all with informed consent. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joy. I think that's a great introduction to reminiscence therapy, particularly in sort of really selling the positives of it. I particularly like the fact that it's embedded within the principles of person-centered care, which I think those principles, which you've run through very quickly, and I will touch on very quickly, and you'll probably touch on very quickly, are something that really underpin a lot of the work in this area. And it's easy to think of things like reminiscence as sort of technical things that you do, or life story is something that you do, but really it's better to think of it in a more principled way, as a sort of a response to a person, a way of being with a person. It just helps you be with the person through using these techniques. So thank you. Continue moving forward. Sorry for the very fast pace, but I'm going to be talking about challenging behaviour and the role of the carer. And this actually builds very much out of Joy's presentation, in the sense that some of the principles that she talked about are also apparent here. So you'll hear some familiar things, and I might be able to take some shortcuts along the way. Just to define some terms, challenging behaviour is a term that's used to describe behaviours that people engage in that challenge others, clearly. And why I like this term is because it recognises that the challenge, the difficulty, is in the person who's being challenged, not in the person who is doing the behaviour. In a sense, the behaviour itself is something that someone does, for reasons we might think about in a minute, but it's challenging to someone else. Someone is saying, I'm finding this difficult. And also why I like this term is, it doesn't particularly place the problem in the person with dementia themselves. Rather, it just says that there is a relationship aspect to what this person's doing, and the difficulty may be in the person, or it may be in the carer, or it may be something in the communication between them. Another term commonly used in the area is BPSD, Behavioural and Psychological Symptoms of Dementia. And I don't choose to use this term because I don't think it's such a helpful term, because I think it very clearly suggests that all of the behaviour that the person is engaging in is somehow a product of their dementia, and it all resides within them. And it doesn't really recognise the fact that behaviour always takes place in a context, and that there's always relational aspects to behaviour. So I will be using the word challenging behaviour. Also, incidentally, of course, by saying that this is a symptom of an illness, it then suggests what you need to do to cure the problem. Cure the problem is to treat the illness, where it may be that there are all sorts of things that can be done to manage behaviour which are different to that sort of way of thinking of curing an illness. There's a very high prevalence, I won't give statistics just due to time issues, but amongst people with dementia, especially those living in institutional settings, in care homes, hospitals, residential homes, nursing homes. It's not uncommon at all, and a large part of my clinical work within the UK will be working with this population that I feel very passionate about. So what behaviours do carers find particularly difficult? As I said earlier, it's often not behaviours that are related to memory. It's things that Often carers might find embarrassing. So people doing behaviours that they say it's embarrassing or it's undignified. Maybe it's the carer feels that there's something shameful about it, for example. Carers find that very difficult. Or it's behaviours that are related to personality, so swearing or being very aggressive or being very violent maybe, or quite sexualized in some way, so that seem to be related to changes in the frontal parts of the brain. Clearly risky behaviours get everyone very worried, leaving the gas on, wandering off, etc. and so on, maybe risks of falling. These are the sorts of things that understandably get carers very, very concerned. And carers can also find themselves being extremely frustrated with repetitive behaviours. Dementia often causes people to be rather repetitive, so they may ask similar questions over and over and over again, or engage in a behaviour over and over and over again. And carers can often find that very difficult to manage, and it's the sort of thing that they might need support with. And partly that might be about thinking about what the behaviour means, why the person chooses to ask the same question over and over again. What is it they're communicating? And we'll come on to some of those ideas in a minute. So I think there's a lot of reasons to take a psychological approach in this area. There really is not a good evidence base for the use of medications in people with challenging behaviour. Medications are often used because challenging behaviours are extremely concerning. They can lead to people being very vulnerable, very open to exploitation, and there may not be enough resources to support the person, but there isn't really a very good evidence base for their use within the literature. And of course there are also risks with medication, so they can lead to further complications and side effects, etc. That isn't to say they don't have a role, but they're not the cure to the problem, although they might have a role in managing the problem sometimes. Also, there are ethical problems with restraint, whether that be physical restraint or even chemical restraint. So I guess what you're trying to do when you're restraining someone is sort of stopping someone expressing whatever it is they need to express, or getting their needs met. And there are ethical concerns with that. There are also ethical concerns with, say, punishing people or depriving people of things as a way of managing behaviour. These are very dubious. I guess you're getting yourself into dodgy grounds the more you go down that line. Psychologically, it's helpful to think about these behaviours psychologically because it recognises relationships, it recognises environment, it recognises the meanings. What does it mean for the person who's engaging in this behaviour? What's going on around them? What are they trying to say, basically? And those are very important things to think about. And this approach very much focuses on that. It isn't to say that other approaches don't, but the centre of a psychological approach are those sorts of themes. And it recognises those who are around the patient, again, as I was saying at the beginning, the system around the person. Once you start thinking psychologically about challenging behaviour, you're immediately thinking about, well, what's it like for the friends? What's it like for the family? How do the staff experience that? And they're then placed into it, and their needs can be thought about. And carers can very understandably get extremely worn out when they're dealing with some of these behaviours on a day-in, day-out basis in the way that Regini was talking about in terms of burden. But I think it's often helpful for carers to remember when they're feeling extremely burnt out that patients aren't normally doing it deliberately or to annoy people. That's a very sort of common thing I would hear. Well, they could stop it, they're just doing it to annoy people, or they're doing it to get attention. That's not normally the case in my experience, and the literature wouldn't suggest either. Also, whilst the behaviour might relate to their personality or to the dementia, the current situation is nearly always involved in some way. So I'll often hear people say, oh, they've always been difficult, or something like that. I mean, that may well be true. There may have been aspects of their personality that's always been challenging to the carer, but that doesn't mean that that's the full story. And also, the full story is never, well, of course they are wandering, they have dementia, or of course they're shouting at people, they have Alzheimer's disease. Because as we all know, there are many people with these diseases and these conditions that don't behave in that way. So there are clearly other factors. Carers also can sometimes need help to remember that there is always hope that things can be better. The situation can always feel extremely hopeless for some people and extremely like nothing will change. I mean, one can imagine how difficult it must be to care for 8 to 10 years for someone, but there's always hope. And sometimes someone else needs to hold that hope and needs to hold that belief that things can change. And finally, an idea that on some level, the behaviour, however difficult, however frustrating, does make sense. And I'm going to move on now to think about some of the psychological ideas which can underpin this making sense of the behaviour. Why does the person engage in the behaviour that they engage in? So Joy's already talked about this idea of psychological needs, and this sort of flower arrangement was an idea that was come up with originally by Tom Kitwood, who's a very kind of large named researcher in this area. Sort of kicked off this idea of person-centred care. And his basic idea is that we all have these needs, as Joy said. However, for many of us, on a day-to-day basis, they're not apparent because we go around, we get them met, and nothing much happens. I have these needs, everyone in this room has these needs, but we don't necessarily need to have kind of very strong outward expressions which might frustrate others. However, people with dementia also have these needs, but they may have particular difficulty getting these needs met. It might be that it's harder for them to communicate the needs than it used to be, or it might be that it's harder for them to actually get the needs met. So for example, we all have a need for identity, we all have a need for role, we all have a need to be someone. And yet, if you're placed in a care home environment, sometimes your identity is lost. You're no longer the person you were. Maybe you were a mother. You were a mother of 6 children, and your role, how you defined yourself, was as a caring person who provided for others, yet you no longer have that caring role. That caring role has been taken away from you. In fact, you are cared for, and that may be very difficult for you to be cared for, because your identity is to care. And your response to being cared for might be to sort of push against that. And that might be very difficult for carers to understand, of course, but it might be a reflection of the need for identity, for example. So Graham Stokes, another big name in the area, talks about these needs which we need to think about. Here's a sort of another way of representing this. And I guess the basic point here is that the challenging behaviour, it represents the expression of the need. And the need itself is perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with the need. It might just be that the expression of the need is not okay to the person who it's being expressed to. So therefore, what needs to happen is to find a way for the person to be able to express their needs or get their needs met in a way that isn't invalidating some sort of rule or law or family ethos, something like that. There needs to be a way that the person is able to express their understandable needs, rather than having their needs rejected or pushed away. And indeed, life story has been shown to be quite an important thing in this area. I think that's one of the underpinning pieces of research for Joy's research. Moving on from this idea of needs, some other clinicians in the area, Cheston and Bender, are very interested in this idea of attachment, which is a huge area that I won't go into in much detail. But I think it's fair to say that dementia causes people a huge amount of uncertainty and a huge amount of fear and a huge amount of doubt. I mean, I wonder we can't really imagine, without having dementia, what it would be like to be forgetting things that you always knew. So you always knew some things, you were always good at some things, yet these days you can't remember that, or you can't do that. The skills that you used to have and you no longer have, for example. Also, the way that you used to be treated. Maybe you were always treated as a very powerful person within your family, or you were always treated in a very independent way. And yet people are treating you differently these days. And finally, maybe people aren't asking your opinion, they're not seeking your ideas as they used to. And all of these changes which come along with dementia can cause a huge amount of insecurity. When I say insecurity, I mean feelings that things aren't right. That might be uncertainty or fear. And what can happen in this situation is people need to get their needs for basic closeness met. And some of those needs from earlier in their life can re-emerge, or new needs can come forward. And so some of the behaviours that people engage in can often represent ways of getting their needs met. A good example of this would be many of the carers that I've worked with would say, particularly husbands and wives or children would say, my husband, he frustrates me so much these days. He's always right behind me. Wherever I go, he's there. And we used to get on with independent lives, and wherever I go now, he's there. If I go into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, he's there. If I go to the bathroom, he's standing outside the bathroom. And that can understandably cause carers huge amounts of problems. But maybe what's happening here is the person with dementia has a need for closeness with that person because they don't feel right, something isn't correct for them. And so they're stepping up their needs for that closeness in line with them, stepping up their needs for closeness by being physically closer to them. So a number of behaviours can come up as people try to get close to people or kind of try to keep them away, because sometimes people want to keep other people at distance. And I guess the important thing to think about is that the strategies that people use to do that sort of thing depend very much on the level of impairment that they have. So, for example, someone who is maybe quite early in their dementia experience might be able just to ask, am I okay? Is everything okay? And that might be able to be enough to settle them. Someone a bit later on in their experience of dementia who's finding it harder to communicate verbally, maybe they're the sort of person who wanders around after the person to get their needs met, and what they need is to feel safer in themselves. Later on in the illness, maybe someone's response is to shout out or to cry or to scream, which is extremely frustrating for carers and very difficult to deal with. But what are they expressing? Maybe they're expressing, I need someone there, or maybe they're expressing something else. But that's a good example of how, as the condition progresses, the ways that people have to say, this is what I need, become more and more desperate, I would say. So within all of this, what we're really doing is trying to understand, get some meaning. What is it that this person who is behaving in this way, what are they actually expressing? And we're trying to get a kind of close understanding of the client and their current needs. So what is it that they need within the context of the previous life of the client? So what have they always been like? What were they like as a person? What were their needs? What was the relationship like? And how is that playing out now? That's the kind of thing that we're trying to do. Simultaneously, we're trying to think about communication. So what is being expressed in this behaviour, as I've already talked about? What is the behaviour actually saying to me? What is this person trying to say, which they can't say in another way? And what ways of communicating does this person have? Maybe due to the illness, but also due to the environment that they live in. They don't have many ways of communicating their needs anymore, and so they're using ways of communicating their needs which are causing more problems than they're solving. And is the person expressing a need that they can't express in some other way?